Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to episode 12. Episode 12 and 13 of season 2 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. I'm not going to give you the usual preamble because today's episodes aren't regular episodes. Last week, we finished talking about the You're Gonna Get It album, and I have a double header for you this week. Split into two parts, episodes 12 and 13 document a fantastic conversation I had with the immensely talented Jake Thistle. Jake played a ton of Tom songs and gave me lots of insight into how Tom and other influences like Jackson Browne and Springsteen and John Prine and John Hyatt have sort of shaped the way that he approaches music. Now, in this first episode, episode 12, there's a lot more talk and a lot less music. But in the second episode, in episode 13, there's way more music. So most likely, I'm going to enjoy listening to the second episode more, and I think you might too, because I'm less in it. I should also mention that just due to the technology that we use to record the episode, my audio isn't quite as crisp and clear. So I hope you'll bear with me through that. I've tried to balance everything out as much as I could, but yeah, just tune in, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Jake Thistle.
I think we talked about this last time, but I always really enjoy, especially Tom, when there's such a great band behind him all the time, and that's not in the room with me. I'm always trying to reimagine songs however I can. But this is one I've never tried on piano, but I wanted to. I especially wanted to break it out for this feed, just because of, the album you're reviewing this week, and it's going to be a good time. And this is one of my favorites off that one. And this is also this was one of the first songs that I was lucky enough to play with a few of the Heartbreakers out in L.A. We opened with Learn and Fly, and then we kind of kicked off we kind of started acoustic, ease everyone in, and then this was like the rock thing that we opened with. But I hope you like it. Take her away with your money and your cocaine. You keep thinking that her mind is gonna change, but I know everything is okay. She's gonna listen to her heart. It's gonna tell her what to do. She might need a lot of loving, but she don't need you. To think that I'm being used. You want her to think it's over. You can't see it doesn't matter what you do. And buddy, you don't even know her. She's gonna listen to her heart. It's gonna tell her what to do. She might need a lot of loving, but she don't need you. You just can't creep up behind her, and you can't understand. She's my girl, she's my girl. Yeah. Gonna tell her what to do. She might need a lot of loving, but she don't need you. Ooh. 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 So I hope you like that one. I figured I'd start off with that one just because of the "You're Gonna Get It" week.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the episode that I did about Listen to Her Heart, I said that Tom's obviously a rock and roller, but that it's such a perfect pop song, and he had that ability to just write melodies that anyone, and it's such a timeless song, right? Which is why it's still played on the radio, which is why people still love it. It's because it's perfect. Every single part of it is perfect. It's such a strong bridge as well in that song. Drops out of the memory, and then gives that little bit of room to breathe, and then it comes back again. It's such a great track.
Of course, yeah. Especially, it's like when I was learning guitar, I pretty much the first 20 songs I learned were Tom Petty songs, but this was such a great song to learn for me. It's probably like fourth or fifth song because it's such a recognizable opening that is pretty much just one chord, really, and it doesn't change. It's one finger's lifted off and back on. So it's like, it's such a recognizable, awesome pop rock riff, and it's, he's able to do it so simply, and that's so amazing,
Well, and that's the beauty of it too, is the simplicity, right? And again, as soon as you hear that first chord, within the first split second, you know exactly what song that is because it couldn't be anything else, right? I was thinking too about the lyrics and that, and obviously the controversy, or there could have been a controversy about the record company wanted him to change cocaine to champagne.
Yes.
And of course, Tom said, well, cocaine's more expensive than champagne. But when you think about the song sonically, or just as a singer too, like the way you sing cocaine, it's got a real hard consonant at the start of both syllables, where champagne's really soft. And I think that makes a huge difference. If you say champagne in that song, it just doesn't work musically. So I think that's even more important than anything else, right? It's got to fit musically. So,
yeah, for sure. I think, not only, I think it paints a totally different picture of the character he's trying to write.
Yeah.
And it's just, I get maybe it's the hard, the cuss sounds, but it just makes him sound less aggressive that way.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, cocaine's got a leather jacket, champagne's got a blazer and a Lincoln Continental, right? It's just a different kind of person.
Exactly. So it's very interesting because I guess you could make the argument that those things contrast like that, but even just the sound of the syllables kind of represents what they are.
Absolutely, yeah. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about you and your background. So where were you brought up, and what part of the world do you live in? For those people who don't know.
Sure. Brought up and still live in New Jersey, so it's it's been a great time playing music here. It's such a great music scene, and it's interesting. I always say we are such a especially musically we're such a diverse state. In terms of the music that was from around here. Obviously, it's a lot of Springsteen, Bon Jovi, Sinatra, things like that. But you can, like, for example, I've had such great opportunities in the North Jersey region and playing, but even if you get down to Central, it's a totally different scene, but it's still so much fun. And so this summer I spent a lot of time in like South Jersey and down the Jersey Shore. And so, it does, I guess it sounds like I'm quoting a Springsteen song when I talk about this stuff, but it really is just a really interesting place. And there's such a great appreciation for music of all kinds. So it's been really supportive to grow up in an environment like that.
When it's, like I said, it's hard not to sound like a Springsteen song when you're talking about those places, because it's part of American culture now, partly because Springsteen wrote such epic poems and ballads about the place, right? About the place itself and the people there. So of course it's going to sound that way, I think.
Yes, exactly. It probably helps, as I'm so familiar with the places that he's talked, or a lot of the places that he's talked about, that when I start talking about it, I think of Madame Marie, and then it's like Sandy and all these things. So, it's very interesting. And it's funny. I think there are a lot of things probably, he's so famous for writing about where he's from. And when I went down to Gainesville for one of the birthday bashes for Tom Petty, I was looking around and it was all these things I recognized. And I had no idea that he wrote about where he grew up as much as it helps that I grew up around here. But even so, I just think Springsteen is just so much, more well known for writing about that part of his life than I think Tom was. But I'm walking around and there's Lillian's music store. There, there's the dogwood trees and everything like that he's talking, Spanish moss, and like all these regional things that I don't see over here, and I'm realizing, oh, okay, that's why he said that. That's why he wrote that. And I always think that's really interesting because I look around New Jersey and I think, okay, yeah, well, he's known for that, and we see it. But going down there, that's what I noticed too.
Yeah, and I think as a songwriter yourself too, you pick up things like that, right? That's where you get some of those inspirations, even if it's just a phrase on the side of a building or a street name can really give you, wait a minute, I could definitely use that. It's very lyrical. I can definitely shoehorn that some in there so it goes in the book, and then later on we'll pull it out and maybe we'll use that, right?
Yes, exactly. Even though I am, every time I write a song and I write like the Parkway in it or something about New Jersey, I'm like, oh, it sounds a little Springsteen. Let me see if I could tone that down a little bit so they don't think I'm trying to copy him.
When you do, I think musically, and we'll talk about your album a little bit later on. But musically, you feel a bit more West Coast than East Coast to me, just in sort of the sensibilities and your sort of the things that you sing about tend to be a little bit more West Coast to my ear than East Coast. I don't know if that would be fair or you would agree with that.
Yeah, I totally understand where that comes from. I listen to, as we've talked about, I grew up with Tom Petty music.
Yeah,
that was like my primary. I've always said they've been my favorite band since I was 3 when I saw them at the Super Bowl show, and so they kind of, I think, from a young age, I just kind of had that sound embedded, and then it really helped that when I was sitting down, to record that album in particular, and it was my first album, I didn't know what to expect. And I had to do it at home. I didn't have a full band behind me, so it was really tough to this was at the very start of COVID, so I didn't have anyone over for it. I just ended up having to do all the instruments myself. So that big driving, East Coast sound, I guess, that like Southside Johnny, Bruce Springsteen, like with the horns and stuff. Like I didn't have that at all. So I kind of used Jackson Browne as my reference for how I wanted it arranged. And that was just because, like, the Standing in the Breach album, I thought was an interesting take on how a band sounds. There's a lot of songs that just use a shaker or just use, one or two different instruments where a full band might use a bunch. So I think that's where that West Coast sound kind of came from, just growing up with the Petty music and that type of songwriting, and then also, being influenced by Jackson and his sound. They were probably the 2 biggest influences on that album that came out.
So when that football game broke out at the Tom Petty concert at the Super Bowl,
yes,
obviously that's the first time you heard them, but being so young, obviously sort of your appreciation of that is more visceral. It's not as sort of intellectual. You're not going to connect with the music in the same way. Do you remember a specific moment or a song or an album that really gripped you once you were sort of listening to music a little bit with a bit more maturity that grabbed you and you just thought, oh my God, this is just the best thing ever?
Yeah, I was a little young. I hadn't heard him. I was only 2 when Highway Companion came out, so I hadn't that Super Bowl show hadn't happened. Mudcrutch, I also really hadn't heard him yet, and then Mojo, I was still a little young for, but I still remember I was in kindergarten when that came out, and I still remember being very, very excited for it. And so I don't have much memory of actually opening the album, listening to it, whatever, but I do know that I did that. And then I would say it wasn't even necessarily a song or an album in particular that got me really excited about this music, but I would say it was the excitement that led up to Hypnotic Eye. Obviously that album's great. I listen to it all the time, but I think what really got me paying attention was just being able to like go on the internet and see like, oh, all right, single tomorrow, or oh, this is the album cover work. He released that promotional video where he's like playing some tracks from it, and he's like kind of crawling on that old vintage radio, and like just seeing him like in a like that what was it, like a fedora and a trench coat or something like that, just like crawling on as like a 9-year-old. That was just really interesting to me. And so, I would say the first song, or the most recent song that I can remember coming out, or I guess I should say the oldest song that I can remember coming out, was Something Good Coming from Mojo. So I guess that song was really the first song that I listened to knowing that it was a new Tom Petty song and being very excited about. But it was the lead up and the immediate aftermath and resolution of Hypnotic Eye, I think, that got me really excited, not just in Tom's music, but just the industry in general and how it all works and how exciting it is when something like that comes out.
And so with Mojo then, when Mojo comes out and you hear that first single and we've got the build-up and the excitement, were you playing at that point? Were you already playing guitar at that point? Or
when Mojo came out, I was not. Mojo was a little before my time.
Yeah.
But I started playing right before Hypnotic Eye came out. Like, literally like a month before Hypnotic Eye came out.
Okay, of course. Mojo's way too old. Yeah, you've been able to play, of course.
Yeah, but I do remember being excited for it. I don't have much memory of Mojo. Again, I was in kindergarten for it, so I'm old enough to kind of place where that was in my life, and I remember being excited. I remember hearing something good coming, and I remember watching the "I Should Have Known It" video. But other than that, like Hypnotic Eye, I remember when it came in the mail, and I ripped off like the plastic on the CD, and like that one was the first one, and of course Mudcrutch 2 is like, at that point I was a good bit older, and I remember, and I was playing, and I saw him and stuff. So,
well, I Should Have Known It was the song that really that was the catalyst for me really starting to dig back into Petty's archive, and we talked about this last time, but I was sort of more or less a greatest hits fan, and I appreciated his music, but I hadn't really dug into it. And a friend of mine, who's also an excellent musician in town here, Chris Klein, had come over and he played that song for me. And we're sitting watching him, he's watching my face. And then when it breaks into that double time at the end, it's like, oh yeah, no, we're talking. This is just absolute full on rock and roll. And then listen to the rest of Mojo, and that was that. Then I started from Tom Petty, the Heartbreakers, You're Gonna Get It, Down the Torpedoes, and then I was just hooked. Then I was in, and then it was Wildflowers that really sort of was the final nail in my coffin when I listened to that and thought, this isn't just a rock and roll band. These guys can do anything, and Tom can write any type of song. If that's the type of stuff you can put on one album and the variety and the breadth of that material, my God, that just blew me away.
Yeah, for sure.
And so,
there was a documentary about Mojo, actually.
Yes.
We would, now I can drive. Obviously, I hadn't for about 16 years before I could. But so I was always watching concerts and things in the car, but I genuinely cannot estimate how many times I've seen like the Gainesville concert from 2006, the Fenway Park 2014. So sometimes I was trying to expand my horizons. So I guess it was maybe a year or two after Mojo came out, probably still 2 years away from Hypnotic Eye. There was a documentary on Mojo. It was like 40 minutes, and the ending credits was Something Good Coming.
Right.
And I still remember we were driving. We were kind of by West Jersey at that point, and I couldn't figure out what song it was, so I just literally listened to every song on Mojo, and it ended up being, I think it was like literally the last one in the playlist. I'm not sure where it falls on the actual track list, but in the playlist I listened to, it was last. And that was the first time I really materialized hearing that song, and that kind of set me up to be excited for whatever he was going to release next.
Yeah. And so do you have a favorite album? Is it something you would say, like, if you had to pick one? This is one of my questions later, but I'll throw it at you now. If you had to pick one, you can only take one album to the desert island, is the one that you could pick?
That's a really tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll have to go with Wildflowers. I know it's a kind of a safe answer, but I'm a big Wildflowers fan.
Yeah.
I'm also a fan of, obviously Southern Accents is a great one. And it's funny, I always bring this up too, but The Last DJ, Together, is one of my favorite albums of all time. When I listen to it together, individually, not all of those songs are like making it into like my top 5 favorite Petty, top 10 favorite Petty songs, but together I think it works so well. So I might not be like, for example, not that it's a bad song, but I might not be putting Joe in a playlist anytime soon on its own. But when I'm listening to that album, it's one of my favorites.
I had to take Joe out of my Tom Petty playlist for a very specific reason. I'm a distance runner, and every month I'll run a half marathon distance. The problem with that song is, if it comes in at about the 15K mark, I get an adrenaline surge and I go too fast for the duration of the song, and then I can't run anymore because it just fires me up because it's such a hard, acerbic, biting, brilliant song, right? So, Last DJ just as a concept, I think that's the closest they really came to a concept album. Obviously, Southern Accents was supposed to be, but that sort of fell apart. But Last DJ, like you said, it's like The Wall by Pink Floyd. You listen to the album, you don't cherry pick from that album, really. There's a few songs on there, exactly. You can, but yeah.
Yeah, so if I were to add up in my, I have a, when I drive, I have like a 700 song playlist. It's like however many hours, and you never hear the same song twice for 4 weeks. But, if I had to add up what album has the most, probably Wildflowers. I mean, the live anthology by far, but I feel like that's cheating. I could say that one, but, I don't want to be, giving like half answers.
Hey, I didn't put any limitations on that answer. You could totally have live anthology.
My favorite album then is just a thumb drive of every album.
Now that is cheating, but we'll allow it. It's your channel. We'll allow it. So, in terms of sort of the enjoyment of the albums and the songs, I know there's certain songs that if you're just sitting around and you're not prepping for a live stream or you're not sort of learning a new song, is there a song that you sort of always go back to if you're just sitting there noodling and you just want to play, you just want to sing? Is there a song is there sort of a default that you go to that you start with?
Yeah. It's funny. Couple things. When I'm at the piano, it is tough. There's a few songs. I'm not exactly sure why, but I fall into these patterns on the piano. And so basically, no matter what piano, whether it's at like a guitar store or my school here,
Yep.
I cannot sit down without going a little bit into Summer Highland Falls by Billy Joel or Late for the Sky or Blue Sunday.
Okay.
For whatever reason, I'm doing that lick all the time. So if you want to hear that one, I'm sitting at the piano. So
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Absolutely. Let's do it.
I am sitting at the piano, so I promise that every time I sit here, I play it. So I'll prove my point. But
Perfect.
she took her rolled up 20 out of her pocket and paid for my cigarettes. We were friends at first sight in the 7-Eleven light. She said, "Here, let me cover it." And I rolled shotgun all that night. She drove, never made a sound. And I asked if there was anything wrong. She said, "Nothing worth talking about." It's a blue Sunday down the interstate. A blue Sunday, yeah, blue with shades of gray. Her backseat could have been a hotel. I slept for 1,000 years. And every now and then she'd laugh out loud for no reason. I pretended not to hear, and rolled my jacket out under my head and stretched my body out. Couldn't be too far in front of her daddy's bloodhounds. I ain't gonna worry now. And it's a blue Sunday down the interstate. A blue Sunday, yeah, blue with shades of gray. A blue Sunday we never met before. A blue Sunday when it's time to leave, we go. My only complaint about that song is that it's not long enough.
Could stretch it, but then, I suppose it's that thing of, well, those are the lyrics, that's the idea. There it's done, right? So.
Exactly, yeah. Sometimes I just loop it when I'm not playing in front of the camera. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to make this a 4-minute song now,
Well, you can improvise too around the melody, and for sure.
Exactly, yeah.
So you started playing.
The other half of your question. For whatever reason, when I'm testing out a guitar that I think I'm going to buy or whatever, especially electrics, I can't take it out of the store without playing "Crawling Back to You." I don't know why. Just testing that kind of clean electric sound is that's like my go-to song for that. But anyway, those are like the two petty songs. For whatever reason, on piano or guitar, respectively, I can't figure out how to sit down and not play those tunes.
And is that a pass-fail for a guitar? Then if "Crawling Back to You" doesn't sound good on that guitar, that goes back on the wall.
It's gone. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. So you started playing then about 8, 9 years old. Was that that's when you started?
Yeah, 9.
9, yeah.
I got a guitar about 2 months after my 9th birthday.
Yeah.
And then about 4 months after that, I actually picked it up and started learning.
And when was the first YouTube video
that I posted?
Yeah.
Was that would have been the Christmas I started playing. The only reason that YouTube channel was created was because my parents always really enjoyed doing creative cards. You know, having me, like, when I was like a literal baby, they had me like dress up like a detective, and I was like, and you know, and so you know, when it got to like 9 or 10, it's a little less cute for my taste.
Yeah.
They would agree differently, but anyway, they were like, all right, well, you know, you've been playing guitar for 5 months or whatever. Let's do a guitar themed one. So I wrote a Christmas song. I'm not going to play it. I don't think it's up on my YouTube anymore. And that YouTube channel was literally created just to post that video so we could put a little barcode link on the card to scan with your phone. So that was my first video. So cool. Probably just like November 29th or something, however long it took us to mail out the cards. And then my first, and I think this video is still up, which I shouldn't, you know, is Learning to Fly, was me standing in front of the Christmas tree. Because that, you know, I had learned I Won't Back Down. That was the first song I learned. The second song I learned was American Girl. Third was Free Falling. But Learning to Fly was like the first song that actually didn't sound like god awful.
Right.
You know, it's on acoustic, and I didn't need a plug-in for it. And so, I mean, it's by no means, you know, an excellent rendition, but I could make out some of the chords, you know. So that was the first song we actually posted, other than that little Christmas card thing we did.
Yeah, but it's totally adorable too, though. I mean, obviously for you, not so much for you, because obviously we never want to look back on what we did even 2 years ago, never mind 5 or 6, but for your parents, that's something there that they're going to treasure forever. And that is definitely coming out at your wedding, right? You know that for sure, right? That's getting played at your wedding.
Probably, yeah. You know, it's funny. I don't mind watching that video because I can kind of distance myself from the and just say, okay, look, it was, at this point, it was, 8 years ago. It's the videos from 2 or 3 years ago, or even, in some cases, 6-7 months ago. That I'm like, ooh, I would do that better. The 7 years, 6 years, I can kind of distance myself and just say, okay, that's how I played it back then. I didn't know any better. It's the 1 year ago, 2 years ago. I'm like, oh no, you know.
So when did you transition then? Obviously, sort of playing for the camera and getting that confidence to just play in front of your folks and everything is one thing. But then transitioning to a stage and playing in front of other people, what was that process, and when did you start doing that?
I played my first gig. It was a week to the day, I think, or almost to the day of my 10th birthday. So I had been playing for about 7 months at that point. This is, for a timeline, this is about 2 months after the Learning to Fly Christmas tree video that is like the first one on my YouTube. And it was an open mic night. A friend of my parents knew of that was happening, and so we went over and I did 3 songs, and I opened. First song I ever played live was "You Wreck Me." So,
wow.
And it was a good time, but I loved it from the beginning, and so I would just keep going to them, and eventually that kind of turned into a paying gig with the guy that ran it, and just from there I started posting more, playing more, and I've just sped up since then.
And so was that something then the first time you sort of up on stage in front of people with a guitar and it's just you? Did that feel natural right off the bat, or were you sort of stage fright at all, or nerves, or was that pretty easy for you?
No, it was very easy for me. It felt, I mean, I was, everyone was very nice, it seemed like, and even back then, looking back, especially, I have the attitude of just like, well, I was a 9-year-old who had only been playing for a couple months, so either I was surprisingly not the worst, or right. I was the worst, but I was still cute enough where it was okay. So there's really nothing to lose. But I remember having a very good time. Obviously I think I sound a little better now, but all things considered, I think it went pretty well. No, I don't remember being nervous at all. I really haven't been since. It's just something I really love to do. So, I get far more nervous, I guess doing day-to-day things, tests in school or whatever, than I would ever,
Right.
up, with some of my musical heroes or something like that. It's just, I'm so grateful for it that I don't really have time to even think about being nervous about it.
Well, we talked, I think some part of that maybe comes into one of the things we talked about last time was about practicing. And you said that you don't really practice, you play. And there is a distinction between the two things, right? Practice has that feeling that, I've got to do this now, I've got to practice for some end. Whereas if you're just playing because you love doing it, that's an entirely different thing. So if you have that grounding that, well, I'm just up here doing what I love in front of, and there just happens to be people here, I could see how that maybe loosens you up a little bit. But I think still, I would say that it's unusual to find someone so young who does have that confidence. I don't see that. You don't see that very often. So genetically, or you have a gift that sort of allows you to do that effortlessly, I would say.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm very happy that I spent a good 6 years before I started playing just really loving music. I think that really helped me kind of drive my playing, especially when I was younger. Coming up, learning guitar at 8 or 9 or 10 is, I think, a relatively common age for people to start. So, when I started, it was around the same time, one or two of my friends would start, not that they're not really playing now, but, I would always be asked by their parents, like, oh, you're kind of like making those chords quicker than them. You're a little smoother at some of the playing than them. How much do you practice a day? Because they're practicing hour and a half with their book every day or whatever. And I think the thing that helped me the most was, definitely not the advice that a technical, classically trained guitarist would say, but just learning off YouTube instead of from a book, for me, really helped because I had already memorized those songs to my core. Even though I was only 9, having listened to them since I was 3, Won't Back Down, I knew like the back of my hand before I knew how to translate that to guitar. So being able to sit there, once I can start to kind of hear that, it didn't feel like practice because it's just I'm playing my favorite songs, even if I didn't know it yet.
Well, that's the trait of a musician, though, too, right? Is like if you can hear, well, first of all, you need an ear. You have to be able to hear if something's in tune or if you're in the right key, or whatever. But understanding the structure of the song, and if you can just fit the cloth of the chords around the framework skeleton of the song itself, just having that sort of that grounded knowledge of, well, I know exactly where this song goes now. I know when the bridge comes in. I know when the key changes. I know when the outro is. I know when to finish. If you've got that in advance, now all you got to do is plug in the chords. It would certainly make it a little bit easier, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that helped, especially, once I graduated from having to watch a YouTube video to learn every song, I kind of graduated to just having to look at chord charts.
Yeah.
And so having already known the song for, those chord charts are not always very accurate. Some of them are great. A lot of them aren't,
Yeah.
So I'm able to sit there and go, okay, well, that's definitely not what the record is. So I might not know immediately what the record is playing, but I was lucky enough to know the song well enough to kind of sit there and go, yeah, but that's not how he's doing it. And so sometimes I like the chord chart better, and I just play that. Sometimes I want to do the record version. So, now I mainly learn by ear. I don't have to, look at chord charts as closely. But especially at that time, I was always very grateful for having kind of internalized that song before I knew how to play it.
Well, you touched on there too, that even the live versions, I know that sometimes when you put in, especially a Tom Petty song, because I know those songs so well too, you'll throw in little phrasings and you'll be singing it the way he sings it live. It's not the way he sings it on the album, it's the way he always sings it live. And that's for the fans, is always like, okay, yeah, this kid's the real deal. This guy's a real Tom Petty fan. He's not just parroting the words out, right? So,
thank you. I love basically if there's a live version, like on the anthology or something of any of his songs, pretty much that's the version I listen to the most. His records always sound great. He was such a great studio musician, but I think especially too, you can hear his voice, change as he got older, as everyone's did. So maybe it's because I grew up with that kind of like Tom Petty in his 50s, in his 60s. Maybe that's why I gravitate more naturally to that voice, that I hear. But like to me, clear difference between hearing him sing like American Girl in '76 versus hearing him sing it at the Hollywood Bowl.
Yep.
And I can. That's something I used to play with my parents a lot. They'd be impressed. They would play like a live version. I could tell them I try to guess like the decade. Like that is like an '80s Tom Petty voice. Or like no, that's a Wildflowers Tom Petty voice. And they would always be impressed. But I feel like I kind of gravitate more towards the later Tom Petty. Perhaps it's just because I grew up and that's who he was. He was the voice of authority in rock and roll, the senior with the beard and the hair. That's who Tom Petty is to me. And I think it's very interesting because I know to a lot of people he's like the blonde with the aviator glasses and like the flying V guitar. But that's like a foreign world to me in a lot of ways.
No, and it's dead right, because every artist who has that longevity and sticks around for so long, depending on what your entry point is to their catalog and your experience with them, you're definitely going to that first association typically tends to be the strongest one, right? And so for me, it was like the first time I ever really heard Tom Petty would have been Full Moon Fever. So it would have been Free Fall, and it would have been, Walk Back Down. It would have been those songs. So that era Tom Petty, the very slick, kind of cool guy on MTV, that was my Tom Petty. That was what I grew up with. And so finding out there was this, and you think that in the later years, he wasn't as active on stage because he was older and he couldn't move around. Yeah. So then going back and watching the old videos and watching him running around like a maniac and jumping in the air and knee sliding, it's like, oh my God, I didn't realize he was that, I didn't realize he was that animated on stage. It's super cool.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's a great website, I can't remember the name of it now, that has a whole bunch of, I think it's Live Petty it's called. And they have a bunch of, it's none of the official release stuff. They don't touch any copyrighted stuff, but they've got just masses and masses and masses of audio and video. So you go back and watch some of those old videos, and then you watch, like you said, that evolution of playing style, of songwriting style, vocal style, delivery, just professionalism, the way they sort of the show built and the way the musicians interacted. Watching that development of a band like that is, as a musician, is really interesting. And I was saying to a previous guest, Dallas Helliker, we were talking about Hypnotic Eye, which you touched on. And I think the very sort of saddest thing about Tom passing away was Hypnotic Eye was not the work of a band who was just sort of wrapping up their career and getting ready to go on a greatest hits tour for the next 20 years. That was a band still in the ascendancy. That's still some of his sharpest, most brilliant songwriting is on that album. And so, whether or not he would have toured anymore in the future, creatively, he still had everything, right? So,
of course, yeah. I mean, that was not only a fresh sound for the Heartbreakers, but that was just a fresh sound in general. That was such a fun album to listen to. And, a lot of times I wish I had been a little older and a little more familiar with the music when that came out, because I think I would have appreciated it a lot more. Because, like I said before, that's really the first one I can totally remember being released. And really, I guess that means I can only really totally remember 2 of his albums being released. But I think, if that were to come out now, I think that was, the coolest thing ever to hear him in that environment. Especially because we were coming up, Mojo was very kind of rock blues as well. But, we were still kind of coming off that, that kind of Highway Companion, more Americana. Yeah. Even The Last DJ was kind of Americana, in a certain sense, and Echo for that matter. So this was kind of a shift for them. And I think now, I mean, I liked it then, but now I think I could really appreciate that and realize how cool that actually was to be experiencing.
Well, I think too, part of that as well, I always think is when, before Mojo, Echo was the last sort of the breakup. That was the last part of that breakup period in his life with, Wildflowers, She's the One, and Echo. They're really, that's a 3 set for me. And obviously Rick Rubin produced all 3, so they sound quite similar. But that's 3 albums that fit together as a 3. And I think after that, and with Dana coming into his life, you get the sense on the last 3 albums that they're a lot more, the band's more relaxed. And now they're really just doing it because they want to play and they want to have fun. And so they record Mojo, out at their little hideaway in LA. Mm-hmm. And so it's that sort of sense of, screw it. We're going to be able to sell records. We're Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. The record company will take what we give them. We've earned that right now. So let's just have fun and play music that we really enjoy. And you really get that sense of fun, I think, from those last 3 albums. Yeah,
for sure. I think that's why I'm very grateful in a lot of ways to be kind of experience these artists for the first time when they're in their later careers. And another one I can really think of is I'm a huge John Hyatt fan.
Yeah.
And, he's been great for as long as he's been out. He's had a career in relatively equal length to the Heartbreakers, but he didn't really hit, any sort of, he didn't hit his biggest success until the Full Moon Fever era, so it's crazy to think about, but he's really found his sound in his last, 25 years. Walk On was the album that I think kind of defined the rest of his sound, and that was 95. So it's interesting, for Tom, he stayed so true to his sound, in a totally different way than John. But I think in a lot of ways they kind of, and of course he's nominated for a Grammy this year. He just put out an album last year, so he's still going. But I think, he is, more towards the end of his career. And so for Tom and him at the end of their careers, they kind of closed out in almost a similar way, like still very fresh, but still super true to how they've always been doing it. And I think that layer of true to how they've always been doing it over the still fresh is such a perfect combination that we're seeing with, we saw with Tom, and even that Mudcrutch too. I thought, especially bringing back the old songs that we hadn't heard since like the playback whatever from 70 whatever. I just hearing how he evolved and how he, like on Trailer, there's that extra verse. That's not on playback. That is on the album, and I think it's such a good verse.
Well, it's so rare too. Like I said, I was talking when we were talking about Hypnotic Eye and sort of artists who are at that stage of their careers. It is rare that they do manage to stay fresh somehow, but yet still maintain their sound. And I think I always think with, and hopefully there's not too many real hardcore Springsteen fans. I think that's where Springsteen loses me a little bit. Where his last sort of 10, 15 years, I think he's been a bit more comfortable, and he's kind of he's coloured within the lines a little bit more than Tom Petty or John Hyatt did, or even Jackson Brown. Jackson Brown's latest album is absolutely just sublime. It's funny,
right? Jackson is competing with John Hyatt for Best Americana Grammy, and I'm like, oh man,
who do you vote for?
I know, but I understand what you're saying about Springsteen. I loved Western Stars. I thought that was super, super cool. Yeah. I literally is one of my favorite Springsteen albums of all time. Like, it's grown on me immensely, and I listen to it all the time. But like Letter to You, I really liked. But I know, like, if I Was a Priest and Janie Needs a Shooter were two old songs he brought back.
Yeah.
And when I listened to the album all the way through for the first time, like, I was listening, I said, these sound like old Springsteen songs. These don't, I could tell that difference. But, having not heard anything, putting Refugee, if you slid that onto Hypnotic Eye, I think like, oh, wow, that's a cool sound.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily, but with Bruce, and again, I loved Ghosts, See You in My Dreams. Those new songs are great songs, but there's something, maybe it's like an urgency about the other songs where I was thinking like, no, but this sounds like 70s Bruce. This sounds like...
Right.
There's like something above the song that just was saying like, this is an old song. This is not something he wrote at 70, something. Yeah,
and I should say too that I do love Bruce. I'm not absolutely not dissing Bruce Springsteen at all. So yeah, I mean the guy's written how many freaking great songs? Some of the great songs in the new American Songbook, right? So I'm absolutely not dissing Bruce Springsteen. So just to make that clear before I get any DMs. So, okay, so let's talk about a little bit, and we'll get another song maybe in a minute. But let's talk a little bit about the opportunities that you had to go down and play with the Heartbreakers, because that's that's just dream come true stuff. Obviously, for a kid who grew up listening to Tom Petty and absorbing all this music and obsessing over it, as clearly you have done your whole life. What was that process like? How did that opportunity come about, first and foremost?
I mean, it was totally unbelievable. Just to I've learned so much from watching them. So getting to play with some of them, and I've met. I never got to meet Tom, but I met all the Heartbreakers, and they're all just. They're such cool people. Yeah. Like, that's the only way I can describe it. Like, they're not... I mean, they're rock stars, but there's, like, a coolness to it that I can't describe. And, so I guess it really started just, posting on, Facebook and things like that. I kind of, built a little bit of a base that was nice enough to like me and take an interest. And in addition, I do a lot of work for Rock the Dogs, which is Mike Campbell's charity. That it's a part of Tassie Fund, which is such a great organization out. It's an animal rescue charity in kind of the LA area, but every once in a while, a dog will be adopted around here. One time I helped, kind of survey a house, make sure it was okay for the dog and things like that.
Oh, cool.
But when I can't physically, literally help because a lot of it's on the other side of the country, I just try to do these fees and things. So he kind of knew me through that, Mike, and independently. For Christmas one year, I got a letter and like a package in the mail, and it said to Jake from Santa, and it had Tom Petty wrapped in paper, and I didn't know. It said don't open till Christmas, so being the 11-year-old I ripped it open immediately. But I mean, it was just it was so cool, and it ended up being a letter from his manager. Here, hold on, I have it right here.
Awesome.
It was a letter from his manager and a signed copy of Mojo.
Right on, yeah.
And two front row tickets to his show at the Prudential Center, which ended up being the last tour. And so I got to go, and when Mike found out that I was going to be there, he sent someone, and I got to go back and meet all the Heartbreakers. Again, I didn't get to meet Tom, but I got to meet all the Heartbreakers, and Joe Walsh was opening, so he kind of walked down the stage next to me, and it was just so cool. I got to watch some from the side of the stage right by the steps, and then I went around to the seats, and it was such a great time. and they were all just so nice and so cool. And in the meantime, I'd still been playing a lot. And when we ended up doing a thing down in Gainesville, I was invited, which was very nice, and I got to meet some of his family. His brother Bruce is and his wife Beth. They're incredibly nice family. And at this point, Tom had already passed, and so it was obviously tough for all of them to be there with all the fans and listening to the music for a whole weekend. But they were, they were great. And then when they started to put something together in L.A., I have a friend in New York and a friend out in the San Diego area, and they both were kind of coming together to put this, kind of concert and get it going. And I was kind of a mutual name that popped up, and they ended up hiring me to go out. And, so out there of the Heartbreakers I played with, it was Ron and Steve, and they were both just like the coolest people ever, the nicest people ever. And there's so many really talented musicians out there. The Orbison brothers and Carmen Vandenberg and Earl Slick and just like Jim Keltner. I mean, it was amazing. It'd be amazing to play with either of them. But the fact that I everyone, in the audience, on like Jim Keltner and Steve Ferrone playing at the same time on two different kits behind you, like there is no way anyone's falling out of time on that stage.
No. And if they are, they better.
Like they make the metronome sound like it's skipping a beat. I mean, it was amazing. And again, it was just such. I mean, it was obviously cool in every aspect, but just I was so incredibly grateful to just be able to absorb all of that knowledge just from the stage, and also the literal knowledge. Like they would give me advice and things like that. Ron he knows. He played a beautiful lap steel solo on Walls. A very talented musician out in that area, Chris Torres, sang Walls, and Ron came out on a lap steel and played some stuff. And I thought that was really interesting. I hadn't been too exposed, so I ended up getting the same lap steel, and I play it sometimes. And so every once in a while, he'll shoot me over a text and just like, hey, I was playing around with the lap steel, and I noticed this. I thought it might come in handy for you. And so, like, literally passing down knowledge, but even just being able to play on stage with them, it just... It helped me improve in such a way. I can't even describe it, but I've learned so much from watching them, and playing with them was just incredible.
Yeah, and I think we always come back to that, and I think one of the things that, apart from the music, one of the things that really sort of keeps Tom Petty's fan base as rabid as it is they were so cool. So, like you said, Ron Blair doesn't need to be sending you texts. That interaction's happened. You've been on stage and everything else. But he's just such a cool guy that he's, Jake Thistle he might like this. And then same thing with Steve Ferrone, right? When you listen to him talk, I remember the bit in the Somewhere You Feel Free video that came out in October. When you see him walk into the studio with just that big grin, you can almost feel the tension just drift out of the room, because how could you be anxious or nervous around that kind of energy? Because he's just so positive and happy and friendly, and it's just very, like I said, very, very cool. Yeah,
he is like the funniest person. Like he's exactly how you'd picture. Like when we were out there, we had Jeff Slate. He's based in New York, so I play with him, here on the East Coast. But he's a writer for Rolling Stone and Esquire and NBC Think and things like that. But he plays a lot of music too. He's good friends with like Earl Slick, who was out there with us, and Jesse Mallon, who we brought over, and so he was kind of in charge of running that show, and there was a ton of moving parts, so it was not an easy job. So the set list was like defined. We only had 2 rehearsals. My plane was late, so I missed the first one. Chris Stephen Stills' son, he missed the second one, so like we don't know I didn't even meet some of the people that were playing. There's so many people, so everyone knew that you do exactly what was rehearsed, because he has such a busy job. He's got to stay on stage the whole time, to the point where I wanted to do harmonica on Walls, and even that, he was like, we didn't try it in rehearsal. Okay, you can do it, but like, I don't know how this is going to go. And it's harmonica, it's like, so, very stressed. Everything goes exactly how it should. And so we're sitting up there. I forgot who was on stage, and Steve is just going, what? No one's doing You Don't Know How It Feels. And I was like, no, I guess not. And he goes, no. We need to do You Don't Know How It Feels. Get the harmonica and get the guitar. And he found Ron, and he goes, you remember when we did that? Let's just do that. And so we kind of just followed him. We marched down these stairs like a cartoon. And he's sitting on the side of the stage, and he's going, you don't know how it feels. And Jeff's like, what? No. And so he just marches on stage, and he sang it.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
I have to say, I mean, he sounded great for Steve. There's I'm sure a video on my page somewhere. He sang it the way you'd expect Steve Ferroni to sing it.
Right.
And it was just the funniest thing in the world. It was just Jeff is looking like, what is going on? You know,
Yeah.
It was such a great time. But that's just what he's like. You know, he's just such a funny guy,
Yeah.
such a cool guy. Both of them are, but you know, it's such a great time.
What a great drummer too. I think massively underrated. You know, for people outside, I mean, drummers know who Steve Ferroni is, and same with Keltner. You know, if you give most young people these days those two names, they're not going to have a clue you're talking about. But we're talking about two of the all-time greatest session drummers in the history of rock and roll, certainly in America, right? And you've got both of those guys behind you playing a gig at what, 15 years old?
Yeah, something like that. 16.
That's just 56.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just
15, yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And do you ever look back and think about that, or do you sort of?
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I'll sit here, you know, I'll be playing something and be like, oh wait, hold on, I have, you know, that was the best part was, you know, these are songs that I've played as a fan for so long.
Yeah.
So if I was confused on something, you know, there's plenty of songs where I'm like, what's it? You know, I could just ask, and that was what was so cool. You know, I did a thing. I don't remember. It might have been for school, and it was a Tom Petty song, and I was overdubbing a lot of instruments on it, and I was doing the bass part, and I didn't ask him, but it was so cool that in the back of my mind, I could think, okay, but if I can't figure this out, I know the guy that did it, and I know the guy that's done it for 40 years in front of, you know, millions of people over that time. So worst comes to worst, I'm definitely going to be able to figure out this bass part one way or another. You know, so I didn't end up bothering him with it because I could figure it out, but it was so cool that in the back of my head that was a possibility even, you know.
No, it's a luxury that few people have.
Yeah, I text him every Super Bowl. You know, that's what we always talk about. It's because they know that's the first time I saw him. You know, Steve always has a really funny comment about whatever the Super Bowl show is that year.
Yeah.
I remember the year it was, the first year I texted him during the Super Bowl was during the Shakira Super Bowl.
Right, it's okay.
And I said, you know, Steve, it's crazy. You know, I'm watching the halftime show. It's not, you know, it's nothing like the Heartbreakers show, but I always think of you guys every year. I hope it's a great one. I never expect, you know, they always reply back. I never expect them to.
Yeah.
And so I sent that to him and Ron. And, you know, Ron, oh, yeah, man. You know, Ron's just like such a San Diego cool guy.
Right,
yeah, man, you know, that was wild. You know, it was such a great time. You know, so great to see you. Get back out here soon. Great.
Yeah.
And then Steve just replies back like, I asked if I could shake my ass as much as Shakira. They wouldn't let me do it, so I don't know what changed. You know?
Oh, man. It's so funny when you go through, you know, and I hate looking at them, and I don't know why I do, but I always do, but the lists of the top X number of whatever it is, right, and the top Super Bowl performances. And I'm always scrolling, and I'm like, wait a minute, where's Petty? Why are we not? We're not in the top 5, really? We're not in the top. We're putting that above Tom Petty. And I think one of the reasons maybe is because they actually played bloody live. They played the songs. They didn't just mime to backing tracks to make it sound absolutely perfect as much. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
And the same with Prince when Prince played, and he played in the rain. Like, get real artists out there. Get someone with a guitar out there, for God's sake. It's the big American spectacle. You should have rock and roll in there. It should be part of it, to me.
Of course, yeah.
But being an English Canadian, maybe I don't want to say it.
When they were, you know, I mean, I know it was only 4 songs, but they headlined. It was them.
Yes.
You know, and the same thing with when, you know, McCartney did it and Springsteen did it. And, you know, these days I know it's like usually 3 or 4 acts. And I guess that does make sense in a lot of ways, you know, for, you know, marketing, you know, to their audience. But I thought it was cool that, you know, they went out there. They did 4 greatest hits. You know, all you know, Heartbreakers, McCartney, and all those guys. And I think it was less frantic. And I think, you know, it was really cool to watch. It was equally, I mean, it was the same speed, but it was less frantic than these days.
Yeah.
You know, they still had to cut a lot of verses out of their songs, you know, cut guitar solos, and you could see him counting off really quick and, you know, between the songs. But, which must have been tough for him because, you know, seeing him live, it was always like these long stories, and it was always so cool. So that must have been interesting for him. But, you know, it just seems these days like frantic is just, okay, he's doing this and then he's doing this and this is a different song. And I guess that's cool in its own right, but I've always really enjoyed that kind of linear thing, you know? Yeah,
it's more of a spectacle now than a performance, I think, right? That's how I would categorize that, where you've got Prince or McCartney or even the Chili Peppers or something like that. That's a performance, whereas now it's more about the spectacle, and Katy Perry comes in on that huge horse or unicorn, whatever the hell it was. It was super cool. I mean, it looks great, but it's not about the music anymore. It's not about the performance, which maybe that's okay.
I mean, I guess, it doesn't seem like that long ago that the Heartbreakers played, but I guess it was almost 15 years ago now.
Yeah,
right?
it's a while ago now, yeah.
So, like, in that time, a lot has changed just with how news carries. So I guess the ones that happen now, like, I mean, even though Heartbreakers is my favorite by far, I know that the 4-act, dancing one trends quicker on Twitter. That's just the reality, So,
yeah.
it makes sense that they do that. But I always thought it was interesting to, have the Super Bowl stuff.
Well, that leads into an interesting question that I have for you, and then I'll get you to play another song maybe, so we don't bore people half to death because we're nerding out here. But I do find it interesting that I told you this last time. The first time I saw your face pop up on my feed and it's Tom Petty, I'm like, okay, well, what do I got here? We've got a good looking young lad with a guitar. This is going to be either a Bieber clone or an Ed Sheeran clone. Those are your two options, it seems, these days with a kid with a guitar. So I'll put it on. Oh, no, very surprising, isn't? But as you say, you're picking music to listen to and music to write and record that isn't what you would call mainstream, right? It's not sort of your poppy. It's not got a drum loop in there or whatever else it is. Mm-hmm. Has there ever been a temptation to try to write something or try to cover something in that direction? Or is that so alien to you that you don't feel that music, that it's just never even entered the conversation in your head?
Well, I always, before anything, I just try to cover songs and write songs that I have fun playing.
Okay.
And I also try to know my audience to the best of my ability. So, having originally when I didn't have an audience, I played whatever I wanted. Yeah. I still do, but whatever I wanted was Tom Petty, John Hyatt, Bruce Springsteen. And so I've been lucky enough to kind of just accumulate that audience from posting in the Facebook groups and getting recommended from other fans who liked me, and they say it to their friends or whatever. So that's why I'm always happy to continue doing it. So on the social media stuff and my live gigs, people who come to see me, that's what I'm doing, is just trying to play to my audience. So, it's not necessarily, I think, a temptation to go mainstream or stay kind of on, the path of what I listen to. I think it's just trying to know my audience. For school, for example, I'm the choir president. So like earlier in the year, we put on like this kind of like open mic night thing, and I ran sound for it, but I ended up going up at the end and I played, and I figured, okay, well, I'll know my audience for this too. They're not, I learned 2 Harry Styles songs and I did them, and the audience loved them. And I don't listen to him very consistently, but I've liked what I heard. I know that he writes stuff. I think these days I think there's a lot of because we talk a lot about that like Bieber era, which I guess was almost 15 years ago now, something like that. He was like a little before my time of listening to music. I guess not my time because I was already listening to music, but like that my generation. Of that kind of like pop star, weird, produced thing. And I think that kind of is still affecting how like younger artists are looked at today. I don't know if that's always still the case though. Like I said, I've never seen, I'll use him as another example just because I know of him better than other musicians, but like Harry Styles, like I know he really plays instruments. Yeah. I know he's really writing songs. And so even though I'm not listening to him as consistently as I am the artist that I have, albums of over here or my covers, I still, I appreciate what he does, and I still like a lot of his songs, so I think it just has to do with more of playing what I enjoy and knowing my audience. And I've been really lucky enough where that's been the same thing. Whether it's, here on Facebook where I know there's a lot of Petty, Springsteen, Prine, those types of fans. I love playing those songs, and I'm very grateful people listen to my originals. I love playing my originals and writing. But, when I'm in school and I know there's a bunch of 14 to 18-year-olds who don't know what any of that is, I also can enjoy playing stuff like that too. So it's not necessarily, I think, a temptation, but just a want to kind of do what makes other people happy while still making me happy.
Well, I think that is...
Hey, thanks for getting to this point. The second half of my conversation with Jake will thankfully contain a lot more music. Jake is, in my opinion, the best interpreter of Tom Petty's music on the planet right now, and we really get a lot more music in the second half. So until we meet again,